Everybody, welcome and thank you for tuning in for another episode of the Earn It Podcast. On today's episode, I'm going to talk about the shadow market for NP school clinicals. All right. So again, thank you so much for tuning back into the show here. So today, what we're going to talk about, I'm going to talk about one of the biggest open secrets in nurse practitioner education. And it's something almost every NP student has heard about and some have experienced. And quite frankly, more and more experience it every single year, every single semester. And for some reason, nobody really wants to talk about it. And what I'm talking about is the growing industry of paid clinical placement services, and more importantly, the educational system that has made those businesses necessary. This isn't really a story about companies, though. This is a story about universities. Let me kind of explain what I'm talking about. What exactly are students paying tuition for going to nurse practitioner school? Okay, when you enroll in a graduate school, you're buying an education. And the education includes up to and including everything required to complete your education. For some reason, books are not included, but they're not included in anything. You're paying for lectures, you're paying for faculty, testing, simulations, clinical training, and clinical experiences are not optional. They are required not only to graduate, but even if for some reason some crazy NP school was able to exist without requiring clinical experience, that individual that would be graduating would not be allowed to sit for boards and become a nurse practitioner. So why is it that thousands of students are being told that it's their responsibility to find their own preceptors and find their own locations and hours, make it fit into their schedule along with the schooling that they've paid for, okay? Obviously, that's ridiculous, but that's what happens every single day. Nurse practitioner programs have exploded over the last 20 years with increased demand. Online education's been expanding. Universities have opened programs across the country, and enrollment has grown rapidly. But clinical placement capacity has not grew rapidly along with it. Hospitals didn't suddenly create thousands of additional preceptors. Okay, experienced nurse practitioners are busier than they have been. Burnout has increased. Expectations of productivity have increased, and there are fewer clinicians that have time to teach. So universities have had a couple different options. They had a decision to make: either limit enrollment or shift the burden to the students. And a lot of NP schools chose the second option, which was to shift the burden of finding all of these clinical hours and their preceptors, onto students. And there are many different, and I won't name them, there are platforms that you can go to. So if you aren't the kind of person that can just call around and, ask all these people, hey, do you have time? Can I do my hours with you? If you're not able to do that because for some reason that's just a personality trait of yours, it's something that you have issues doing, then you are going to have to go to one of these online platforms that match you with preceptors. And here's the thing. I'm sure there's a process between a given NP school and vetting the preceptor to make sure that they're a real person. But to be honest with you, this isn't. I'd have to look a lot more into how often this happens, but obviously, for obvious reasons, it wouldn't be really reported. But with the current system the way it is in a lot of different schools, and again, not all schools do this, I want to be clear, you could go and find your own preceptor or somebody with the right credentials, and they could fill out all the appropriate paperwork and say that you did all your clinical hours when in fact you didn't do them or you didn't do any of them. So that's another issue that kind of rises from this shadow market. But aside from that, students are paying thousands of dollars for tuition. They're having to pay back all these student loans. And those all of that cost does not include the entirety of what you need to graduate. And that's what I and a lot of people take issue with. That's you're paying all this money and then you have to go and pay more money in order to get someone to watch you and precept you while you're going and doing your clinical hours for nurse practitioner school. I don't know if this is the case in any other kind of medical programs, and that's not really the purview within the scope of this episode of the podcast. But it's just really crazy. Okay, so now students are responsible, right? So they're responsible for finding placements, and then a market emerged. Placement services now connect students with available preceptors. And some students pay thousands of dollars for this. At the very least, they pay hundreds of dollars for this. These companies did not create the shortage or anything like that. They just created a platform to meet an unmet need. It's basically an electronic middleman, mostly useless, because here's the thing. If you think about it, all these preceptors have to interact with this website as well. There needed to be some kind of place for it, but instead of using a specific few social media sites or anything like that, you have to pay for it. And I think that that's a little bit ridiculous. The real issue isn't even about these placement services, although I would argue that here's the issue. Nobody likes them because they're just a middleman. But these placement services shouldn't even exist because the schools should be taking the responsibility. Universities have normalized outsourcing one of the core responsibilities of clinical education. So students pay tuition, then they spend months emailing clinics, calling hospitals, messaging people on LinkedIn, joining Facebook groups, and just overall begging different providers. And sometimes this can delay graduation, and that's because not everybody's going to have money set aside for paying preceptors, right? But even if that's the case, that doesn't guarantee that a preceptor is available for you. So let's follow the incentives, okay? Universities can admit larger classes, and this increase in tuition increases the revenue for these schools. But then the placement responsibility for clinical hours shifts solely to the students. They then have administrative costs decrease because they don't have to arrange all these things. The students absorb the risk. If they can't find a preceptor, graduation gets delayed, not because they failed, right? Not because they didn't study, but only because they couldn't locate unpaid labor for who? Not the student, the university. All of these preceptors that are not getting compensated, any additional compensation for all of the extra time that they put in to, help the newest up and coming nurse practitioners, right? That are going to work in their field. Instead of, these people go completely unpaid, or they get paid only because of these kind of middlemen sort of websites. Meanwhile, the schools are the only ones really truly benefiting from this whole thing, right? So this isn't, I just want to be clear about a few things. What about the preceptors, right? This is not about the practicing nurse practitioners, okay? It has nothing to do with them. These are overwhelmed. They're still seeing more patients. Documentation's increased, demands on their productivity. Again, teaching takes additional time, and there's no compensation for it most of the time. There's no protected time for that, no workload reduction. They still have to see the same amount of patients in the same amount of time, and they have to do all the documentation. And then the added, responsibility of having a student can be overwhelming. Not to mention that without a student, a lot of NPs are really kind of burned out in the first place, right? So if we want more preceptors, we have to compensate them in some way. Right? I mean, doesn't that seem fair that they should get compensation in some way? I mean, sure, there are probably a few that just absolutely love it or will do a favor because, oh yeah, I really, this person's really cool, right? So it might be about, who you know. But, if a university can't provide enough clinical placements, it should not admit additional students. That's how every other educational program works. Clinical education should be treated as part of an educational product, right? It's not an add-on that's optional for students to have to secure for themselves. Accrediting organizations could also encourage stronger placement accountability and transparency. So I'm not necessarily blaming the accrediting bodies, but these are the only people that are going to really, truly be able to change the way things are. What I mean by that is you can encourage universities that they need to, that, hey, this is wrong what you're doing, please fix what you're doing. But they're not going to have any real incentive to comply unless people stop going to their school, and then their revenue then decreases. But if their revenue decreases enough, then they could probably, handle arranging clinical placements for the handful of students that still go there. So, there's no real, anything motivating schools to make this change. In my personal opinion, this has to start all the way at the top. And that is, hey, if you're going to get a regional or whatever accreditation, and you want to be able to have your nurse practitioner graduates, be able to sit for boards and become a practicing nurse practitioner, you as a school have to make sure that every single one of these students have clinical placements. Okay. Now, I'm a nursing student. I have 5 months left of being a nursing student. If I had to find all my clinical placements, it would be rough, right? It's already really overwhelming. But imagine if nursing schools, right? Now, there's a nursing shortage. Don't get me wrong, right? There's a shortage of practitioners. So they thought, universities thought, let's treat, quote unquote, this, nursing practitioner shortage by just letting more people get into school. And we don't have to worry about where they do their clinicals at because it's not going to be our responsibility to figure that out, right? Imagine if nursing schools decided the same thing. It would be a complete disaster, right? There are less people going to nurse practitioner school, right, than there are getting into nursing school and going to nursing school. I think the last time I looked, it was somewhere in the neighborhood of about 280,000 nursing students. There's going to be more about that coming up soon. I'm going to have a guest on. And we're going to go through some of these numbers for reasons that I won't go into right now. But basically, I have done a dive on how many nursing students there are, how many nurse practitioner students there are every year. And the number, it really is a big difference. I think it's like less than a third or less than a quarter. It's like 20 something percent of the amount of people going to nurse practitioner school than there are going to nursing school. But again, even with or was it more than that? I want to see. I thought it was around 400,000 students. Yeah, it's around 400,000 nursing students getting their RN. Okay. So, that's a large number, and we pump out 400,000 nurses a year, and we still have such a nursing shortage in the United States, right? Supposedly and allegedly, but given that that's true, right, this is a problem. Imagine if nursing schools decided that they would address this whole nursing shortage problem by saying, hey, instead of taking 30 to 40 nursing students every semester, we are going to take 200, right, at each school, let's say. And yeah, obviously they'll have to increase faculty a little bit, but they're going to get a large amount of tuition. They're not going to have enough placement, and it's going to be up to the students to get that placement. No matter what, whether they get their, placements or not, that school is going to get some tuition money. Even if a student joins and then after like 5 or 6, months or whatever, the student is like, I can't find that. Well, guess what? You still owe the tuition for that semester. And that's exactly what happens with these NP schools. Okay. So this isn't about attacking any one company. Businesses need to respond to demand, right? So the bigger question is why graduate students, after paying tens of thousands of dollars, are still expected to locate one of the most important parts of their education on their own. If we want stronger nurse practitioner education, we need stronger clinical education, right? That makes perfect sense. Most of the folks going to NP school aren't wanting to sit and work on a computer all day and not interact with any patients, right? There's a reason why you're going to NP school and not going to learn how to code, okay? If clinical education is required, responsibility shouldn't end with the student. I'd love to hear from you guys on what you think about this. If you're a nurse practitioner listening or went to NP school, did you find, Did your school find you clinical placements? Were you expected to do it yourself? Do you think universities should be required to graduate placements before accepting tuition? Leave a comment, send a message, join the conversation. Until next time, let's keep asking uncomfortable questions. Thanks so much for listening to the Earn It podcast. Think like a nurse and go out there and earn it.